do, I want to introduce you to my uncle, this man of standard, this man who loves the Lord, and this man who has continued to lead his family in that direction. And that will be Brian Benton.
Good morning, church.
Good morning.
It's a blessing to be here this morning. First, I'd like to thank Reverend Wooten for inviting me to speak today. This morning when I spoke to him, he said, don't rush, take your time. You have exactly 15 minutes to make your point. So I'm going to try to listen to him and make sure I'm out of here in 15 minutes. Secondly, I would like to thank my wife, Yvette. She's been very supportive, and she has allowed me to be a great father. Not only allowed me to be a great father, but she supported me. And fathers, we know that there are a lot of people out there, or not a lot of people, but there are some people out there who don't want us to succeed as fathers. They plant seeds of doubts in people's minds, in our children's minds, some family members' minds to try to divide us. And so when you have someone in your corner like I have, it's truly a blessing. And my wife will be the first one to tell you to take her husband's name out your mouth. Okay? So let's talk about fathers. It takes all types of fathers to develop children into positive and productive adults. We have biological fathers, we have stepfathers, we have brothers who support children and act as fathers. We have uncles who act as fathers, teachers, and we also have coaches that act as fathers. Now, oftentimes the media tries to tell us what a father looks like, what a good father looks like. I mean, just recently we see Steph Curry with his children, after the championships, and you hear the announcers say what a great father he is. We see LeBron James with his kids. We see Aaron Donald, who played for the Los Angeles Rams, and he was on the podium with his children. And again, these are examples of good fathers. But what about that father who works the graveyard shift, who stays up all night, comes home in the morning, makes breakfast for his kids, takes them to school, comes home, takes a nap, and then goes to his second job? We don't hear about those stories. We don't hear the stories about that father who only gets his kids on every other weekend. And he has to change his schedule to make sure that when he sees his kids, it's a great experience. We don't see that type of image in the media. We see, just recently I was watching television, and LeBron James and some other professional athletes were sitting in the front row watching their children play. And I thought to myself, what if the camera went up 5 more rows and did a story on that father sitting in the 5th row? You probably hear a story about a father who couldn't get off work and who had to negotiate with his supervisors to leave work an hour early so he could get to his kid's game. You would probably hear a story about a father who had to try to switch shifts with a coworker so he could get there and see his kids. Or in my case, I would always just call in sick, so I could either go to a game or go to a play or some type of function that my kids were involved in. But you don't see those types of stories in the media. You always see the image of that father who's successful and has lots of money, who gives their kids these lavish gifts. But you don't see the image of that father who has to work overtime just to make ends meet, or that father who maxes out his credit cards because he wants his kids to have the same thing that all the other kids. And we always hear the term deadbeat dad. He's a deadbeat dad. Oftentimes, a deadbeat dad is a dead broke dad. Okay? A deadbeat dad oftentimes is just a dead broke dad who's trying to make ends meet and doing the best he can. So let's talk about the roles of fathers. The roles of fathers are changing with the times. They're evolving with the times. My father was a very quiet, very direct father, but times are changing, and fathers, we need to change and evolve with the times. There was a time where a father, his major concern was teaching his kid how to deal with bullies in school. Nowadays, you have to teach your child how to deal with active shooters, people who are coming into the classroom and trying to murder you. My father never had to do that. But now as a father, we have to talk to our kids, and we have to explain these things, and we have to take on a new role. My children grew up during the time in like around 1999 when we had the Columbine shooting. So this stuff has been going on for a long time. So my children's elementary school didn't allow them to have cell phones. But my children had cell phones in the bottom of their backpack, and we called it the bat phone. And if there was ever anything that was going to go down in the school, they were to call me, and I would be there, and we had a plan. And my father never had to do that. But as a father now, things are changing, and we need to change and evolve with the times. My father never had to tell me about how to deal with police officers if they pull you over. Now we see so many young black men who are unarmed and killed by police officers. As fathers, we need to start having that conversation and talk to them about what they need to do. When I was a police officer, I patrolled an area called the West Los Angeles Division. In that division, there was a lot of rich people, a lot of nice homes, celebrities, and in that area was a campus of UCLA. Great school, wonderful school. But UCLA was in the middle of this predominantly white neighborhood. And probably about 3 times a month, we would get calls of a suspicious black man walking through the neighborhood with a backpack. And I remember this one particular time when we arrived at a backup call. There was this young man who was being searched, police had him handcuffed, and the officers were going through his backpack. And each one was taking out a book. And it was a UCLA science book, UCLA history book. It was obviously that this young man was a student. And so I went to the officer and I said, well, why are you still searching this guy and have him handcuffed? He's a UCLA student. And they said, well, how do you know he probably stole the backpack? Right? So that always stayed in my mind. And when my son Bryce got accepted into UCLA, my whole family was excited. Everyone was excited except for me. I was terrified because of the things that I experienced, the things that I saw. And so the first day of school, we went to the bookstore and we bought 10 UCLA shirts. And I told them, do not leave the dorm unless you have on one of these shirts, because we want to try to erase some of that doubt out of people's minds. And so as fathers, we need to tell our kids these stories. We need to tell them things that aren't in an AP calculus book, things that are not in an honors history book. We need to tell them our experience. Our forefathers, that's how we learned, by stories. And as fathers, we need to continue to tell our kids their stories. And sometimes the stories aren't always good, but we need to educate our kids. When my sons were about 11 and 12, I sat them down and I decided to tell them about my experience working in the LA riots. So I tell them, I told them about Rodney King, who was a black man who was beaten by the police. I told them about Latasha Harlins, who was a young girl who was killed by a liquor store owner, and the liquor store owner didn't get any time in jail or prison. I told them about Reginald Denny, who was a white man who was pulled out of his truck by an angry mob. And as I'm telling them this, and I'm telling them about fires and the looting, my oldest son, who was 12, his name is Jordan, he was on his phone, and he was doing something. He was just moving his fingers. And so I said, Jordan, can you put the phone down? I'm trying to explain something to you, very important. And he said, Dad, keep going, I hear you, I hear everything. I'm just doing a little fact checking your facts. I'm on Google. He goes, and so far you're doing pretty good, keep on going. And so at that time, I thought, wow, what would my father have done if I did that? Right? He would have took off his belt, and he would have checked my facts, right? But times are changing and we are evolving as parents. So I asked my son to put the phone down, and I talked to him about it. And then once I was done, he went back to his fact checking. And that's very symbolic of what fathers have to go through today. No matter what you do, no matter what your decisions are, somebody is going to check your facts.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to go online and find out if what you did was correct or if there was a better way that you should have handled that situation.
Yeah.
They're going to check and see what Oprah would have done. They're going to check and see what Dr. Phil would have done about that. They're going to check with Dr. Spock and see what he says about that. So that's very symbolic because as fathers, somebody is always watching what we do and checking our facts.
Yeah.
So another thing I want to talk about, which is very important, is as a father, you have to learn the difference between your plan and God's purpose. Fathers, when we have children, we always devise a plan. We want to have it laid out what school they go to, what sport they're going to play, what instrument they're going to play, what school they're going to go to. But you have to know the difference between your plan and God's purpose. Now, when my daughter, Sydney, was around 9 years old, it was obvious that she was going to be a great athlete. So she joined the track team in her elementary school. So I, just like all of you guys are influenced by the media. I wanted to be like Earl Woods, like Tiger Woods' father. I wanted to be like Richard Williams, Venus and Serena's father. I wanted to coach my daughter to stardom. I wanted to make her great. So I went to her and I told her my plan. I told her I was going to pick her up from school and we were going to work out together. And I asked her, I said, what do you think about that? And I said, I'm going to make you great. She said, Dad, that is not a good plan. She says, I have a better plan. She said, I don't want to be the only one great. I want my teammates and my friends to say I have the same opportunity as I have. She says, I want you to go to the principal and ask the principal if you can be the coach of the team. And that way, we all can be great, and we can all have a chance to be a star. And, I was really impressed by that, but I was very disappointed because that wasn't the plan. And I told her, I said, if we do this, you're going to make a sacrifice. You're not going to get my full attention. And she says, you always talk about sacrifice, Dad. Well, this is my opportunity to make a sacrifice. So I listened to my daughter. I went to the principal, and she made me the head coach of the track team. Now, the facility was bad. The yard was a cement yard, and it was not ideal conditions. So there was this young boy who was the worst kid in the school. He had a reputation of throwing books. Teachers hated him. He was this far from being kicked out of school. And so I watched him, and I wanted to go up to him and talk to him, but you have to be careful because sometimes when you have crazy kids, it's because their parents are crazy also. So I didn't approach him right away. So I watched him, and then eventually I went up to him, and we had a conversation, and he was surprised that I didn't scold him like all the other teachers. And I began to talk to him before practice and after practice. And I soon saw a change in his behavior. In fact, his mother came to me and said, I noticed there's a change in my son's behavior. And I want to know, can you coach him after school and coach him on the weekends? And in my mind, I was like, well, that's not the plan. The plan is to coach the best kid, my daughter, not the worst kid, your son. Right? So I did start coaching him. And to make a long story short, I went to his graduation, and his mom told me, I don't think that he would have graduated from high school, and he would not have been accepted into this college if it wasn't for you. And again, I was very grateful, but it wasn't part of the plan. And that young man is in college now. My daughter is in college on a track scholarship. And I'm still at that same raggedy elementary school coaching kids. Right? And every year, I get the worst kid to come out for track. Every year. And so, I had to realize that, I think that's my purpose.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get my plan, but that is the purpose. And as Pastor Wooten mentioned in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so I just want to have fathers out there be aware that it's great raising your child and being supportive of your child. But as Pastor Wooten mentioned, there are a lot of children out there who don't have support, who don't have their fathers in prison, and their fathers aren't in their lives for various reasons. So I want all fathers to be aware that your child can put you in a situation where it's not just about you and your child, but you're in a position to help another child who's nearby, give words of encouragement, and be there for that child. And so the roles of a father are changing with the times. And so I just want to encourage all fathers to evolve with that and be there for all the children. Thank you.